and hi everybody. I have just started work fairly recently in May as ORCID's Director of Communications. Before that, my background's really in scholarly publishing, so this conference is very much my conference. You're my people. It's lovely to be here. I'm wearing a slightly different hat. As I say, I've only been at ORCID for just over 3 months now, so I'm sticking to the stuff that I think I have a pretty good grasp of. There's all sorts of other stuff that we're doing that I'm still learning. If you have questions about things that I'm not covering here, please feel free to ask them. I'll answer them if I can, but otherwise I'll find somebody who is able to answer them for you. Okay, this is hardly breaking news that digital scholarly communications requires information that's machine readable. I think it's something that, I can't imagine anybody in this room would disagree with that. However, I think that, although we kind of know that, we don't necessarily surface that a lot of the time. And I think there's a whole community around the research infrastructure, which our Executive Director, Laurie Hack, calls the plumbing under the sink, that perhaps we don't make as much noise about as we should. And particularly the publishers in the community who very often have launched and are supporting these sorts of initiatives. Maybe it's something that you all could be cheerleading a little bit more about, because I think many of your audiences, researchers, funders and so on, are really not very aware that all of this is happening up beneath the surface. It's making it possible for researchers to do their work much more easily and efficiently, but they don't really understand why or how it's happening. They don't need to. The only time they know about it is when something goes wrong. So I think perhaps as a start to my talk, a little kind of rallying cry for publishers and others in the scholarly community who are involved in and supporting this sort of research infrastructure to make a bit more of it would be a really great thing for us to do. So talking specifically about ORCID, I expect, in fact, I should probably ask, is there anybody, has everybody heard of ORCID at least? Yes. So I'm going to do just like a little whistle-stop tour of what we are, what we do, just to give a bit of context for then going on to talk a bit about some of the new stuff that we've been working on. So I think you probably all know that ORCID's core mission is to solve the name disambiguation problem in scholarly communications. And, there are some obvious things that, as you know, if you're called John Smith or Anthony Liu or something like that, there's loads of you out there, and you might be working in the same field, you might be working in the same institution, you could be working in the same department, and it's very easy to get you muddled up with somebody else. There's also different versions of your name, and this is something that I've experienced personally. My initials are AJ Meadows. My dad, before he retired, also wrote on scholarly communications issues, and he's an AJ Meadows, and I'm pretty sure he wouldn't want his works to get muddled up with mine, because his are an awful lot more erudite than mine are. So, that can be an issue as well. And obviously transliteration can be a problem, even if you've got a name that's not common. And then there are issues like accents, multiple family names, and name changes throughout your career. So the thing about an ORCID ID is that it stays with you. It doesn't matter what the iteration of your name is, whether your name changes, your ORCID ID is always going to remain constant. The other issue that ORCID is trying to help solve is that, of course, people may have many identifiers and/or profiles. These are just a few of them. At the ORCID Outreach Conference in May, there was a speaker from the University of Southampton who said that their researchers have no less than 27 unique identifiers for various different systems in their institution. But their hope is that ORCID will be the overriding one, so that all they will have to do is log into ORCID ultimately, and they'll be able to access any of the other systems because it will all be completely integrated. So that's the difference with ORCID. With a researcher ID, for example, it's great if you're in the Thomson Reuters system, but it's not going to carry with you. However, because of our integration with researcher ID and with Thomson Reuters other products, it means that you can get the benefit of both, and the information from one will carry through to the other. So this is just a quick summary of what ORCID is. So basically, persistent digital unique identifier for researchers, and that we want to integrate it, and this is really key, as widely as possible, going back to that first slide, so that this identifier that moves with you will also be available to you in whatever kind of incarnation you are, wherever you are, whatever system you're using. And so just Quickly, we're free to researchers. There's no fee and there never will be a fee for registering. We do rely on community support from many of you are our members. Thank you very much. If you're not and you'd like to be, please do feel free to come and see me. But our member fees really support a lot of what we do. We were also lucky enough to get a large $3 million grant from the Helmsley Trust earlier this year, which is why I can be here. And everything that we do is open, our software, our APIs and our documentation. So this is a kind of illustration of how we see ourselves working as a hub with different kinds of organisations. And again, one of the questions we often get is, how are you working with, what's the relationship between ORCID and ISNI or ORCID and Researcher ID or whatever it might be. So we see ourselves as really sort of central, and the more we can integrate with all those different sorts of initiatives and organisations, the more valuable it will be for all of us, but also most importantly for the researchers. So that just sums up interdisciplinary, international and aiming to improve scholarly communications. So where are we today? We have just around 1.6 million live ORCID IDs. In fact, we very likely are at 1.6 million, but we only get weekly updates, so I'm not quite sure, waiting for the next one. But when I checked yesterday, we were at something like 1.59. So of those, about 275,000 are linked to works, but they're linked to about over 4 million DOIs. So although it's a relatively small number of people who've linked works to their ORCID record, the number of works that they've linked is quite large. About 325,000 have links to at least one place of education, and about 313,000 have links to at least one place of employment. We have over 300 members now, including 3 national consortia, and you've probably seen these were signed fairly recently. So in the UK, we now have an arrangement with JISC. In Italy, the Cineca National Consortium signed a deal with us back in June, and also Denmark. And we are expecting more imminently. You may have seen that Australia is consulting at the moment, and in fact, they will be announcing, I think, next week how many people will be joining their national consortium. And there's more on the horizon. So lots of good news, which is fantastic for us. We also have 145 members who have live integrations. Now, there's a lot of other integrations, many of which we don't actually know about because they're by non-members, because we have a public API. There's a lot of things that people can do with that public API that we're not necessarily aware of, and we know about some of it, but some of it we either stumble across by chance or we may not know about at all. So that's wonderful as well. But the member integrations are the ones that we really like to keep track of, because they're the ones, it's only really with a membership that you can have a full integration that's going to deliver to you and to the researcher the maximum benefit. So those are the ones we track. And there are about 30 more in development. And we're pretty worldwide, although we'd like to be more global. Asia Pacific in particular is an area that we'd like to get better penetration in, because you can imagine countries like China, there's a huge need for a name disambiguation tool like ORCID. So we recently appointed, again as a result of the Helmsley Trust grant, we now have a regional director in Asia who's based in Japan, so we're hoping to see a lot more interest there. Similarly, Latin America is a region where we have some take-up. We've signed in the last year or so, I think we now have 3 Latin American members, 2 of whom have joined in the last couple of months. But again, there's a big issue around name disambiguation there, so that will be great when that ramps up. And we have a new regional director there. We're strong in Europe and obviously the US, which is where the organisation was originally started. And our members come from pretty much all the different areas of the scholarly community, but research institutions, universities and so on are our biggest single membership base, and then publishers, funders, associations and repositories. So here's what we've been up to this year. Earlier this year we launched our Member Support Centre, and if any of you use ORCID and have dealt with our support team, you'll know that they're completely fabulous. There have been only 2 of them. Again, we have now increased, so we have regional support team members in Latin America, Africa, and we're hiring in Asia, and we have somebody in the US, and we're hiring in Europe as well. So we'll have really even better coverage, but they do a fabulous job of keeping on top of support requirements, and the Member Support Centre is a real help to them, because we've put a lot of the information that people typically need there. Peer review is what I'm going to focus on in just a minute, so I won't dwell on that. We are looking at implementing a Crossref Auto-Update functionality, which will be, again, really wonderful when it goes live. The Auto-Update functionality is already live on ORCID, but the Crossref part of it is really important because, as I say, there are already 4 million works that people have sort of manually, in other words, they've gone into their ORCID record, clicked on the search and link button to go and search in Crossref for their papers and added them. But what this auto-update will do is a sort of complete round-trip journey. So as long as an author adds their ORCID ID when they submit their manuscript, that ID will then be added to the metadata and follow through the paper all the way through submission to publication. And when it gets to Crossref, with the author's permission, will then be able to automatically push it back into their ORCID record. So once you've signed up for that, it will be fantastic. Basically, every time you publish an article or any other sort of research work that has a DOI, a Crossref DOI, it will automatically update your records. So we're hoping that once that is live, which should be in the next few weeks, that will really transform the number of works associated with ORCID records. We're working on some stuff around single sign-on, including social sign-on and federated login, which hopefully will be in place by the end of this year, or at least some of it will be in place by the end of this year. We're looking at putting badges on ORCID records so that you can, say that you have a ResearchGate record or whatever. And we're relaunching the ORCID website, which will be done, I hope, in time for our next outreach meeting in early November. If you are ever interested in knowing what's going on at ORCID in the way of development, this is our Trello board. It's publicly available. You can just go on and look. It's pretty transparent. I think we do have one which we hide away, which has some other sort of more detailed comments around, I can't do this. But the public, the completely unhidden, transparent public one will give you a good sense of what we're up to. So, peer review. So this is, I think, is a really exciting development. I think some of you will probably know that earlier this year there was a report by a community working group that was looking at coming up with some standard data that should be collected in order to give credit for peer review. This group reported back in April. In June, we launched our early adopter group, and in August, the development work at our end was complete. I'm very excited to say that within the next few weeks, we're going to have our first 2 early adopters going live, and I have some screenshots that I can show you as proof that it's really going to happen. So these are the data fields that were recommended by the working group. So basically a person field or person fields, review fields, subject fields and organisation fields. And obviously one of the challenges was that we wanted the peer review to be able to work across all different sorts of peer review. So not just journal article peer review, but grant review, conference paper review, promotion and tenure review, even actually annotation. One of the members of the working group was Hypothesis, and they're very keen that researchers should be able to get credit if they make an annotation on, say, archive or something like that, that then leads to an important discovery later, that it should then be possible for the person who added that comment to get credit for it. And we also wanted to be able to deal with all the different sorts of peer review, so not just sort of traditional blind or double-blind peer review, but various different forms of open peer review, pre-publication and post-publication. So the recommendations are intended to take account of all of that. So some of the fields are required, but it's only a very small number, and only enough so that that person can get credit for having done the peer review, but without it being possible to see what they peer reviewed if it's a double-blind. So the person field, we do need to be able to say it's this person so that we can give them the credit. The organisation needs to be on there so that we can say this is this organisation, which might be at the journal level, but it might be at the publisher or society level or the institution or whatever. This organisation is giving this person credit, but we don't need to know what the review was. We don't need to know what the subject was, unless it's open, in which case we can include that information. So it's really a very neat, I can say this because I have nothing to do with it, a very neat solution, and I think we hope will be really instrumental in helping to get researchers credit for the enormous amount of time that many of them spend doing peer review of one form or another. So our first two early adopters, the first one is a collaboration between the American Geophysical Union and eJournal Press, who are their manuscript submission system. So AGU is a large organisation, over 60,000 members, 19 journals, and their goals in this were really very similar to ours, actually. They want to improve appreciation for peer review while preserving the anonymity and also preserving the quality. They want to understand more about how much time researchers are spending doing various different forms of review activity, and they feel that in order to do that, they've got to have much better data. And of course, as a membership organisation, they're especially interested in what their members, how much time their members are spending on review activity, so they can have a better sense of how much their members are contributing to the community. And as a result of that, they want to be able to acknowledge and recognise peer review. So eJournal Press, who are their vendor, basically, this is the process that they're going to use. So already the peer reviewer gets a thank you email, but in that email, there's an encrypted link by which they can claim credit. Sorry, apparently I'm running out of time, so I'm going to whiz through this. I'm actually not going to do this. I'm just going to show you the screenshots. So this is the sample reviewer thank you email with the link. If you click on that, you can then confirm that you want your ORCID record to be updated with the review activity. If you don't have an ORCID ID, or if it's not come through for some reason, you can either confirm it, you're sent to the ORCID page to either confirm or create an ORCID record. The second early adopter is Faculty of 1000. They have these two models, F1000 Prime, which is a sort of informal, almost like an Amazon review type thing, where their reviewers, their experts, find papers that they like and review them and rate them. And their data profile includes a field for these review activities, which will be updated with their ORCID record. And F1000 Research, which is their publishing platform, which has more of a sort of rigorous post-publication review process. And again, these reviews actually have DOIs of their own, and those will be associated with the record. And this is a sample of their reviewer letter. And then one, just to finish, I wanted to let everyone know, if you're very eagle-eyed, you may have spotted that there's a post on this just about on Scholarly Kitchen this morning. A small group of us, these organisations listed here, are experimenting with a small-scale peer review week at the end of September the 28th to October the 2nd. We've kept it very small scale because we only came up with this idea a few weeks ago, and we wanted to tie it in with the Sense About Science annual lecture on September the 28th. But we would love for the community to really give it your support and get involved, follow our hashtag, and maybe, who knows, if it's successful and people like it, perhaps it can be an annual event that we can all use as an opportunity to both celebrate peer review and also to discuss it, to think about how we can improve it, and talk about its value to not just the scholarly community, but actually the community more generally. Have I got time for questions? Yeah. Okay, got time for questions if anybody has any. No? They all come at once, yes.
Great talk, Alex. Thank you. Mark Johnson from PLOS. Great talk. About peer review, one of the things that we've observed at PLOS is that we'll frequently invite an individual to review, and that individual will be a principal investigator, and that person will then delegate to someone from their lab to actually write the review. How is ORCID dealing with that kind of scenario?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, it depends on how, I guess it depends on how the PI wants to deal with it, doesn't it? I mean, I think our hope is that by implementing this, this will be part of a move along with the Project Credit initiative, which is looking to give credit to all contributors to a research paper, not just the author or authors, that it will be part of a general push to giving credit to the people who actually did the work, whatever that work was. So whereas at the moment, you know, historically, there's only been an option really to give credit to the authors / the first name author, and then, as you say, the person who was asked to do the peer review. We hope that this will be part of a kind of stronger push on the community, on the research community to I wouldn't say be more honest, but to be more open about who's actually doing what to make a research paper available.
David Thomas with Thomson Reuters. The question about tracking peer reviews as part of your ORCID ID, your ORCID record. Is that a request from the universities or the funders, or is it a request by the authors themselves in order to be keeping a log or record of this activity? I mean, who's kind of originating, who are the stakeholders in tracking that, and how is it going to be used?
So I think it's a mix. The original idea came out of a very informal conversation between our executive director and the Rebecca Lawrence, the Faculty of 1,000, who were both keen to find ways of recognising peer review more broadly, because it's an activity that many researchers spend a lot of time on, but they don't get recognition at the moment. But there's also been, for example, I don't know if you saw, but a year or so ago, there was a sort of open letter by a bunch of editors in Australia calling on their funders to give credit for and acknowledge the amount of time that Australian researchers are spending doing it. So I think it's a kind of, I don't think there's a specific answer to that. I think this is a kind of community-driven thing that probably some people at the moment don't particularly care about, but many people do. Some have articulated, some haven't, and this is an opportunity for researchers who do feel that they're doing a lot of work in this area and would like to be able to say, look at what I've done, to easily get that credit, or easily have a way of getting that credit. Does that make sense?